Hi, my name is Lilia. We need to get more girls involved with the STEM fields in order to be equal participants in the future generation of innovators and leaders. I reached out to inspiring role models who are paving the way for women around the world to hear about what they had to say on closing the gender gap.
Okay, my name's Deanne Taylor. I'm older than the hills. No, that's not true. I'm nowhere near retirement age. I have a Ph.D. in biophysics. I got it because I did my undergraduate work at Wellesley College, which is a majority women's college. And I actually started off in a community college before that. So if you start from the beginning, I actually left high school. I had a kid. And then I went back to college and I went to community college. And then from there, I got a scholarship to Wellesley College and I decided to study physics and astronomy. And in physics and astronomy, I read a paper when I was an astronomy major at Wellesley because they have their own. I have to mention they have their own telescopes. It's really awesome. I read that only one person ever reads your astronomy paper, on average, which means on average that could mean that there's certain papers that 0 people actually read, and that's unfortunate. So I decided I was going to do biophysics as the Human Genome Project just started. And then from there, I went to Michigan, University of Michigan, and I did a PhD in biophysics there. And then from there, I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Pfizer, which is a pharmaceutical company. And then I went from there to Health. I went to Pfizer, and then I went to EMD Serona, which is a I'm getting a lot of feedback on your side, but EMD Serona is a pharmaceutical company. And then I worked there for 6 years. I went to Harvard School of Public Health, and then from there I went to Rutgers, and from there I'm at Children's Hospital. So it's a long. That's in a nutshell. That's everything. And along the way, there were a lot of interesting, not detours in my training, but interesting side paths in my training, and that's how I ended up with at Children's Hospital. And at Children's Hospital, I'm the director of bioinformatics. I'm also faculty at University of Pennsylvania. In the University of Pennsylvania, I'm in pediatrics, so I do a lot of research having to do with children. But I also do research with people who are working on Veterans Administration projects, NASA. I'm working with NASA on certain projects having to do with the astronauts that went up into space and the effects of them, of radiation and weightlessness on astronauts and mice. They send mice up to space too. And then I'm also working on some large-scale projects, trying to do kind of global analyses of kids' tissues. And so there's a lot of big things happening. And at the Children's Hospital, there's also small but important projects going on that I also help with. And at the Children's Hospital, I also lead a group of about 30 scientists. In my own group, for my own research, I have about 3 to 4 people, depending on the month. But overall, there's about 30 people, including postdoctoral trainees, graduate students, and professional bioinformaticians. And so that's our group there. And we do genetics of children's diseases, cancer, studies of cancer, studying blood donors, how much blood we might need for the next month, depending on the special blood groups, because there's more blood groups than just O negative positives, etc. So there's a wide range of projects we work on there. So I'll stop there, but that's pretty much in a nutshell.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. So I guess on to our questions. Were there any gender barriers you encountered in your career, and if so, how did you deal with them?
This is a hard one because every woman that you talk to who's a scientist is going to have a slightly different answer because it's all our personal experiences. I had some gender barriers that happened at different parts of my career. For example, when I was in graduate school, like I mentioned, I had my child before I went to graduate school. So because I was a single mother, which, you could think of this as a gender barrier or not, because I was a single mother, my advisor didn't want to give me any experiment time on the machines because he was afraid that for some reason I would not be able to show up or something because I was a mom or something. But there were also other things that happened. Like you can tell that there's sometimes people talking over your head. Like if you're a woman standing in, and you might notice this as you get older, not that you don't notice it now, but I mean when you become a professional, you might, and I think this happens a lot when you're the only woman in a group of several men. Sometimes the men kind of talk over you. Not necessarily. Sometimes they're very polite. I'm not saying that they're rude. It just seems to be a thing where the banter happens and you're kind of left out. And I think it's unconscious. It's often on their part. And the gender barrier sometimes is just that people don't realize the social and psychological conditioning that sometimes happens that they may have grown up with, especially people from other cultures where women's equality isn't as well as established as we'd like it to be. So you're going to have gender barriers, or I've had gender barriers really at every level. And it's the best thing to do is what makes you go past those is you just understand them and understand when they're happening and don't take it personally. And the thing is, that's how it can really destroy you, is if you let things like that hit you personally, because science tends to be a very passive aggressive kind of culture where people don't like conflict. And sometimes if people raise the flag and make some conflict, sometimes their colleagues think less of them. And that's not to say we shouldn't say something. It's just that, that's a barrier that we have. That's a gender-based barrier, because we see ourselves being discriminated against, and we say something. We can sometimes be painted as troublemakers, or people who are like crying wolf or something. And I've seen that happen. I know a very good, very famous female scientist who has watched other people in her department who are male and sometimes younger than her get promoted while she hasn't been. And why that is, it's very complicated. I mean, is it easy to prove that she's been discriminated against? No. And those kinds of barriers are insidious and sometimes kind of wear down on you. And the only way to get around them is to just, when it comes down to it, no matter how many times other people get promoted or how many times you feel like you've been discriminated against, which you probably have been, what gets you through it is, if you're a scientist, it's good science. Just do your science, keep an eye out, take care of yourself, take care of your friends, advise younger people, and try to be a good scientist. And sometimes that can help, get past these things. That's really what should drive you, is just to be a good scientist and do rigorous and good science. So, I mean, I wish there was a cure. If there was an easy cure for all this stuff, it would have already been done. I mean, people have been talking about this issue for decades now, and I think it's gotten better. Definitely has gotten better, but I'm not sure it's 100% better. So
yeah, I think you make a good point. Like, if you just focus on what you're doing, hopefully the other things around you will figure itself out.
And even if it doesn't, you have that part of you that is doing the science. You have your integrity, and sometimes your integrity is a strong thing to be able to lean yourself on, to be able to rely on, is your scientific integrity. Like, you do good science, you do honest science, you try to be the best scientist you can. And sometimes it might be like uphill, and sometimes people may not notice that you're being the best scientist you possibly can. But nevertheless, it's something that you have inside yourself, and it's there. And I think that's the important thing that gets us through. Yeah.
So for the next question, you've had many successes in your career, and I suspect your life. Can you share one that you are the most proud of?
I think I said this when I emailed you. The thing is, I'm kind of the opposite. I see all the places where I could do better. I don't really have one that I could be really proud of. I think earning if you're going to say anything, like getting through my Ph.D. In the circumstances I was in, and working through that was probably the highlight of my career, because I don't think I ever had it as tough as I had it at that moment. There's a famous musician named Laurie Anderson. She was married to Lou Reed, who passed away recently. But Laurie Anderson has this performance art where she says, walking is the process of falling and catching yourself over and over again. And that's how I felt like I was when I was going to graduate school. I would make it a little bit, and then I feel like I was about to like just kind of fail because everything was going crazy, and then catch myself, and I'd step forward, and it was almost like putting out fires over and over again because I was a mom and I had to teach full time and I had a part-time job on the side, and I was also getting my research done and trying to get out within 6 years. So there's a lot of stuff going on. So I guess that kind of trial by fire is what prepares you for academia, because I don't think it gets any easier in academia. Even after you get past your graduate dissertation, maybe it starts to feel like, oh, things are going to get easier, but actually things can be just as hard, only in smaller doses. So it's a good preparation.
Yeah. So the next one, upon reflection, was there a defining moment in your career that you can share with us?
Defining moment in my career. That's a tough one. I think there were lots of little ones. I don't think there's any one big one. Even now I feel like I'm still inventing myself, so I don't really feel as well defined as you might think.
That's fine. So what is your personal message to young women entering the STEM field?
So in an email to you, I don't know if you can post that with the video, but there were a whole bunch of suggestions that I made. There's a lot of them. And it has to be a field that you really love. And the reason for that is science is full of failures. A lot of people say this, have said this out loud, and it's no big surprise, but science is full of failures. There's going to be a lot of times where there'll be weeks or months where things aren't working, or you'll spend a lot of time on like kind of not very important projects, and you want to get back to the science that you really want to do. And the important thing is that's what gets you from day to day. There's a lot of demanding effort that goes into science, and little tiny, sometimes large, but some often small victories along the way, which is why it's hard to say if there's anything defining or massively amazing in my career, because there's lots of small little victories that occur. So I would say that loving what you do, in academics, choosing your career is important. If you want to go into academia, which includes your own research and occasional teaching often, and sometimes there's a whole bunch of flavors of academia. You don't have to just be a professor. You could be a research professor. I'm a research professor. I don't need to go for tenure. I could be fired at any time. That's one of the downsides. You don't have like tenure. You're less likely to be like fired, except if you have like some massively problematic ethical problem or something. But and pharma is another good area to be in, but you have to decide which way you want to go. If you want to go in academia, I strongly suggest staying on the traditional path. It's hard to get back onto that path once you've exited. And I think part of my career has been hurt because I did have a child first. Not that there's anything wrong with having a kid first, but I went to community college, then to Wellesley, then from Wellesley to academia. And and from academia, I jumped off the path. It wasn't the beginning that was the problem. It was that I went into pharmaceuticals right afterwards. So because I wanted money, I wanted affordability. I had a kid. So and I was single. So since I didn't have a partner, it was a lot harder. So I said, okay, I'm gonna go work in pharma for a while. And getting back into academia, I think held me back in academia, because you'll notice most successful people in academia go from graduate school to often postdocs, sometimes 1 or 2 postdocs, and then from there into a junior faculty position. But if you don't do that kind of run that way, it actually, I think, holds you back a little bit. But if you do go into pharma, you can do postdocs there. You can interview people there. You can feel free to go and find a mentor there. I mean, there are people in pharma who'd love to be mentors to people who are interested in pharma. And it also does give you a home life. And when you go to pharma, you get to close up your computer at 5 or 6 or whenever you go home, and then have a home life. In academia, things tend to follow you home. Not because they have to, but because it is competitive, and people in pharma, it's a little bit less competitive that way. Kind of situation, which is kind of halfway between the two, but it's also very useful. As far as presenting yourself when you go for employment interviews and stuff, I would say that, first impressions are important, just like they are in industry. But the most important thing for me to tell women is to not apologize for yourself. You don't have to apologize for, oh, I'm sorry a lot, or you don't have to laugh too much if you feel strained about it. You don't have to smile too much. You could be interested and look at people in the eye, listen to what they have to say, pay attention. Sometimes things come from the most outrageous corners of science. You'll be listening to some guy who's doing research in NASA and realize some of the stuff he's working on has impact on what you're doing, and all of a sudden there's a collaboration that shows up. So those collaborations are very important. So first impressions are important, and first impressions are usually very positive when you pay attention to people, you're polite to them, give them the benefit of the doubt. There's a lot of people who I like to call on the spectrum, like myself, that are somewhere not very social, and sometimes a little antisocial, and sometimes very shy. And sometimes those people come off as a little mean, but they don't mean to be. Often they're not jerks. They're just very shy. And so talking to people and keeping an open mind is really important in the field. Also, there are people who are negative and competitive in the fields, and you just have to watch out for those people. Talk to your colleagues when you first go into a place, or when you start setting up collaborations. Find out more about the person that people that you're working with. You don't have to shut anybody off if they have a bad reputation, but just be careful with yourself, because there are patterns of behavior that show up a lot in academia that other people know about. Like there might be one person who always tends to take other people's research and publish it on their own. And that kind of word of mouth spreads pretty quickly, and you'll find out about that. So usually people look out for each other. But also when you work, don't try to let that follow you home unless you're an academic and you have to write grants at home. But don't feel bad about spending time with family and friends. You should take that time. Don't be the junior faculty member who spends a lot of time with lots of committees. When you start off in academia, or even in pharma, sometimes people will load other people, younger people, with additional tasks, and it keeps you from focusing on your research, which is the most important thing for you. So you have to kind of not get saddled early on with a lot of things that aren't directly related to your research if you can help it. Sometimes departments or areas have rules that if you come in, you have to head up this, or you have to do this much teaching, or you have to do this much committee work, but just try to minimize it as much as possible. Even though it's helpful, ultimately the helpfulness can be spread out to other people as well. Another important thing is to make sure you know the measure of success in your field. How do people measure success in your field? In academia, it's easy: papers and grants, right? Bringing money into the organization. And sometimes it's not just the fact that you're bringing money in. Sometimes your organization's really interested in bringing certain types of money in. For example, there's this thing called indirect costs. So if you bring in a huge $50 million grant from a foundation, which is awesome, you're bringing all this money in for research. Sometimes your organization may not be happy with that, because they're interested in NIH grants where they can get a lot more return on the costs that support the they'll only get about 15% from the foundation of the money that you got from NIH. They could get 70% additional money. So, your department, and, part of it is NIH grants are a big deal. It all depends on your organization. Some organizations are really focused on publications and great journals. Some organizations want all of this. So those measures of success where you are working are important. And then in your field, there's also measures of success. Like some people measure success in the biological field if you publish in Cell, you publish in PNAS, or you publish in Science. And those are all, things that you might want to aim for, or at least aim your research to go in those directions. And how you get your research in those directions, you have to ask yourself, what's the most important question in your field, and why aren't you working on it? And that comes from Richard Hamming. If you look up this thing called You and Your Research, it's at Virginia Tech, I think, is a recording of this. It's a very old transcript, but he studied all these really famous people and asked, why am I not one of these famous people? Why did I not rise to their level? And he came up with the idea or the answer that these people worked on the most important questions in their field. And I can always I mean, that's just for any scientist. Ask yourself, and the only way to get to that information, to ask yourself what the most important question is, to do a lot of reading. So that's another advice I can give students, and is to read, not just reading stuff that's directly, if you have time, not just the stuff that's directly related to your research, but stuff that's a little bit left or right. Go to seminars. That also stands in. Going to seminars on, like, if you're if you're in biology, go to some chemistry seminars that look interesting. Go to some physics seminars that might be interesting, or biophysics. But stretch yourself out a little bit and do a lot of reading, and it helps you understand what the important questions are in your field. For children, people ask me about, what's the best time to have kids? And because I had my kid early, what did I think about that? And I hear from a lot of other women have had family and children during graduate school, and it seems to be the consensus that the best time to have a child is after you pass your preliminary exams in graduate school. So after you take your courses for the first 2 years, when you're going towards your PhD, but then you have this break where you're working on your research. Actually, in the research areas where a lot of women think that it's the best time to have your kids, because you can still work on your research unless it's toxic, in which case you don't want to be pregnant in the lab, but that's a different thing. But for the women who are doing computational work or other types of work, non-toxic lab work, maybe being pregnant during grad school would be good for them. I don't know, but that was or postdoc. But both of those were the answers I got from other women. STEM fields in general, though, after you establish yourself, seems to be pretty forgiving of women in STEM fields. And the nice thing is, if you wait till after you have a faculty position to have your children, then you can have people, you can hire people, if you have the money, you can hire people to work in the lab for you during the times where you don't want to be working in the lab with chemicals, for example, if you're a chemist or something. So that's not to say that, you have to do all these crazy things and you have to, like, sacrifice everything to be a mother and have your STEM career and all that. Just try to do it measured, and try to just try to be aware of everything around you. And I mean, that's all I can really tell you. All these different things I'm sure I could tell you a bunch of other stuff too, but these are the big ones I thought of when I wrote that email back to Lilia. So.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. These were really great responses. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Lastly, though, I have one last quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Can you say a few words to help sell young girls going into science, just so I can put it in the video?
It's like the universe whispers in your ear and tells you stuff that no one else knows. I mean, it's amazing how much science, even though from outside looking in, you might say, oh, they're doing all this great science out in the scientific community, and oh, people are discovering things all the time. We're discovering little things, even though if it's a big headline, it's usually incremental. Everything is a little bit at a time, right? No one's going to discover. No one has in physics, for example, discovered the universal constant, the universal, the grand unifying theory, right? Trying to get quantum gravity mixed with it's all these incremental changes that eventually will get us there. The same in mathematics. Someone has a proof, and it's incremental changes. These incremental changes sometimes, though, lead to really satisfying careers. Like, even though you might not be an Einstein and make these huge discoveries, the thing is, if you read and you write stuff down and you work at it and you work at your science, you're going to sometimes stumble across things that no one else in the world knows. And you will be the world's expert on your particular subject. During those times, it's going to feel like you know something no one else knows in the whole world, in the whole universe. And it's actually pretty satisfying, and it's always nice for people to recognize you, or you get in the news or something like that. But then that passes and the next thing happens. So, like, it's just an ongoing discovery process. It's really exciting. It can have its ups and downs, but there's nothing better than having enough freedom to say, I have an idea and I'm going to study this idea. And it gives you more a sense of freedom than just about any other type of career I think I've known my family to have, or I've encountered myself. It's just having your own thoughts become drivers of reality is pretty cool, to study reality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
point. I like that. I like the idea of you knowing something no one else knows. I think that's
Yeah,
cool.
it is really cool. It is. It's like all of a sudden, and you don't have to tell anyone, right? You just for that moment, you can say, "No, I'm not going to tell anyone for this for at least 30 seconds," you know. But then, you know, you have to go back and test it, you know, to make sure it's what you see is not just fake. You know, it's sometimes you can't jump the gun, but you know, there's sometimes those discoveries are really cool, you know, and that's where the papers come from. And there's a famous saying in science that says it's not the most interesting sound in science isn't eureka, like I discovered something, but that's funny, you know, because sometimes you'll discover something that's very odd. It's like, why is that? That's not the way I expect it. And that's where sometimes the big discoveries happen. So that's the fun part too, is like making these little discoveries that sometimes turn into big things. Like CRISPR, if you've heard of CRISPR, that was kind of a that's funny moment if you want to look it up. But
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much. I really
Okay.
appreciate this. Thank you.
Sure. All right. See you later.